Under the waning light of a western dusk, the land seemed to hold its breath. The horizon bled into shades of rust and violet, and the long grass shivered in the dry wind as though whispering secrets. Among the silence came the small, shuddering cry of a child, a sound too fragile, too desperate to belong to such an endless world. "Mama can't breathe," the little one gasped, her tiny hands pressed against the breast of a young woman sprawled in the dirt. The girl's eyes, wide and black as obsidian, glistened with tears that cut clean lines through her dust-streaked cheeks. "Her ribs are broken," she whispered, as though repeating the truth might summon help. But the prairie offered nothing back, only the slow hum of crickets and the moan of the wind. The woman, the mother, was named Winona, a widow no older than 22. Beauty clung to her face like a stubborn ghost, even as suffering carved its lines. Her lips parted in shallow breaths, each one tight with pain, each one uncertain if it would be her last. She had walked too far on bones too weary, carrying grief heavier than any bundle, until her body betrayed her and collapsed beside the child. She was a figure both fragile and fierce, shaped by survival and yet undone by it, her dark braids tangled with dirt and her dress torn open at the seams. She should have been at peace in her people's village, but war and hunger had swept her world away, leaving only the ache of being unwanted on stolen land. The child, little Dove, clutched her mother's limp hand, rocking back and forth as though her motion alone might coax her back. Her small voice rose again, breaking through the quiet like the last echo of a song. "Mama, please," the words scattered upward, fragile things thrown into a vast sky. It was enough to make even the coyotes pause, listening from the shadows. Yet it was not beast nor ghost who answered. From the ridgeline a figure emerged. He was tall, his outline cut sharp against the evening, a lone rider guiding his horse down toward the pair. The man was James Colt, a rancher of 30 years, whose fortune rested on acres of cattle and land but whose heart had long stood empty. He had grown used to the silence of his ranch house, to the way men in town clapped his back and called him lucky, though none of them saw the hollow in his eyes when he returned to his wide, empty porch. Loneliness had become his only companion, an ache he had carried so long it felt like part of his flesh. James reined his horse to a halt a few paces away, watching the scene unfold beneath him. The child's sobs, the mother's shallow gasps, the dust curling into the air, it struck him like something half-remembered, a dream or warning from the past. His instincts told him to ride on. This was not his fight, not his burden. Town talk was already cruel when it came to folks of native blood, and what would they say if he lingered here, if he stooped to help? He could almost hear their laughter already, the sneers of soft-hearted, and worse. His hands tightened on the reins. But little Dove turned her face up toward him and her eyes, so large, so desperate, fixed on his. There was no plea in her words, no polished request, only the naked honesty of a child who did not yet know the world could be so merciless. He felt the smallest crack in his chest, a shift he had not known he was waiting for. He dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the dust. The girl clutched her mother tighter, suspicious of the stranger who loomed above them. Winona, though barely conscious, stirred enough to turn her face away. Her voice rasped, barely more than breath. "Leave us, let us be." James knelt beside her, his shadow stretching long in the falling light. Her words cut him, not for their sharpness but for the quiet shame wound through them. He recognized it. He had known that same tone once, when his father had died, when the world had looked at him with pity he despised. Shame had a way of making one believe they deserved the cruelty of others. He reached for the waterskin at his belt and held it toward her lips. She flinched, refusing still. "I don't mean harm," he said softly, his voice low as if speaking to a spooked horse. "Just a sip. For her sake if not yours." His gaze flicked to little Dove, whose small throat bobbed as she swallowed back more tears. Curiosity pricked the girl's fear. She leaned forward slightly, eyeing the water as if it were a treasure too fine to believe. Winona hesitated, torn between pride and desperation, then finally allowed him to tip a few drops past her cracked lips. The relief was faint but real. Still, her eyes carried defiance as if daring him to pity her. "You can't save what's already broken," she whispered. Each word seemed to scrape her lungs raw. "Best you go on." James did not move. He set the waterskin aside, his broad hands resting on his knees. Silence stretched between them, heavy and strange. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of sage and the faint distant smoke of a campfire not theirs. He thought of turning back to his horse, to his empty house waiting just miles away. But he stayed, staring at the young woman who seemed both near death and unbearably alive. "I won't leave you," he murmured finally, though he was not sure why he spoke it aloud. It was not a promise he had planned to make, yet once released, it settled over him with the weight of truth. Night crept in slow and sure. James built a small fire, careful not to draw too much attention, his motion steady as he gathered brush and struck flint. Little Dove watched with cautious wonder, her tears drying against her skin, her tiny body inching closer to the warmth. Winona lay still, eyes closed, but he noticed her breathing ease ever so slightly in the glow. Every gesture he made was deliberate, a piece of bread broken and set near the girl's hand, a blanket shaken free of dust and placed over Winona's frail shoulders. He did not speak more than necessary. Words often complicated what silence could carry more cleanly. Yet in the quiet, something unspoken passed between them, as though the act of not leaving was itself a language. From time to time, Winona's eyes fluttered open. She watched him with suspicion, with the wariness of one who had been cast aside too often. Yet each time she opened them again and he was still there, tending the fire, feeding her daughter, watching the night, not her. Her gaze softened almost imperceptibly. She wanted to believe in such constancy, but belief was a dangerous thing. Still, curiosity tugged at her. Why had he not gone? James himself wondered the same. He thought of the men in town, the things they would say when word spread that he had taken in a widow with a native child. He imagined the ridicule, the whispers that would follow him like burrs. And yet, as Little Dove laughed suddenly at a spark that jumped from the fire, the sound startled him with its sweetness. It was the first laughter he had heard near his hearth in years. His chest tightened, not with dread but with something far gentler. The stars spilled wide above them, silver and countless, as though the heavens themselves leaned close to witness. The prairie lay endless around, dark and hushed. And still James did not rise to leave. It was in that silence, beneath those stars, with shame and suspicion pressed heavy between them, that the beginning of something unnameable stirred. Neither Winona nor James could yet call it trust, nor hope, nor love. It was too fragile, too undefined. But it was there, flickering faint as the firelight on their tired faces, a thing both of them feared to touch yet could not turn from. And as the night deepened, the world seemed to hold its breath again, waiting to see what shape this fragile spark might take.